It was the summer before my senior year in college. My little brother, who's always been interested in military stuff, had gotten a pair of night vision goggles for his birthday. He left them at my apartment. One night, I was bored and decided to try out the goggles at a wooded hiking area / nature preserve nearby. In retrospect, this seems like a pretty stupid idea since I was all by myself and female. But I was young and stupid, and I got myself all worked up at the prospect of possibly seeing a deer or other woodland critters in their natural nighttime habitat. I was familiar with these woods. My best friend and I had hiked there at night before, and we had never run into anyone else. Our area is mostly rural and pretty safe, so I didn't anticipate any trouble. I parked in the little sparsely lit parking area, ignored the sign that said park closes at 10, and entered the woods, night vision goggles in hand. It was a half moon that night, and that was the only light that filtered down through the canopy of trees. It was pretty dark, and I didn't want to put on the goggles until I found a place to sit down, so I lit my way with the mini mag light on my keychain. A couple of times I thought I heard a little rustling in the woods a fair distance away, but it was nothing out of the ordinary, and I put it down to animal activity. Hopefully it was the deer I had come hoping to see. I hiked a fair distance, found a fallen log to sit on, and put on the goggles. I don't know if you've ever used night vision goggles before, but the effect is impressive. They can turn pitch black darkness into bright as day, and everything appears in shades of green, but quite bright and clear. For a while, I had a blast just looking around from my fallen log vantage point. Some chipmunks played around in the leaves nearby, and a big owl blinked its lamp-like eyes at me from a tree branch. No deer, though, and I started to think that maybe they wouldn't be likely to come anywhere near me, darkness or not, if I continued to sit right out in the open on a log. So I decided to find a place where I could be a little more hidden. I made my way a little deeper into the woods, and finally found a huge tree, perfect for climbing. I've always loved climbing trees, so it was nothing for me to hoist myself up a few branches and settle in to wait for the deer. I didn't get to see any. What I did see, lit up in bright night vision green after about 10 minutes of waiting, was this man, dressed in head to toe in dark clothing, making his way stealthily through the trees. He was coming from the same direction I had just come from, and was clearly trying to stay hidden, moving from tree to tree and glancing around carefully before moving again. It looked very much like he was looking for someone. It took me a few moments to notice that he was carrying something, and when I saw what it was, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. He had a knife, a big one, and he was gripping it, as if he expected to use it in the very near future. It wasn't deer hunting season, and this was a nature preserve where hunting of any kind is prohibited. At any rate, this guy was alone, and not dressed like a hunter. There was no deer in sight, and very few hunters kill their prey with knives. I was suddenly aware of my horrifying situation. A young woman, alone, weaponless, in the middle of the woods at night. This was the 1990s, so no cell phones, and even if I had one, I wouldn't have felt safe using it, lest I draw his attention. I didn't know how he was able to see so well in the dark. I guess his eyes had adjusted, and I was terrified that he would look up and see me. I sat there, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, and watched him as he continued his methodical and stealthy process of scanning the forest for who or whatever the hell he was stalking. I scanned around, but I couldn't see anyone else, even from my high vantage point, and the sickening thought struck me that he might be looking for me. I remembered the rustling noises I had heard in the woods when I first arrived, and then I thought back further and remembered something else. A white car that had followed too close behind me for most of my drive to the nature preserve. I had been a little annoyed and a little freaked out at the time, but when I turned into the nature preserve parking lot and the white car passed me and drove on its way, I didn't think anything more of it. Now I wondered, horrified, if it was the driver of that car, if he had circled back and seen my parked car alone in the lot and decided to come after me. I sat paralyzed in fear and watched the man for what felt like forever, but was probably about half an hour or so. There was a heart-stopping moment when he paused right underneath my tree, and I was sure he was going to look up and find me, but he didn't. After a while, he seemed to have given up on whatever plan he had in mind, and I heard him say,
"Fuck it."
And he started heading back in the direction he came from, the direction of the parking area. I stayed in the tree, wet with sweat and crying, until the sun came up a few hours later. Then I climbed down, and still terrified, gripping the little can of pepper spray on my keychain, I made my way as fast as I could to the parking lot. The man had been there. My windshield had been smashed with a rock, and someone had scraped all down the sides of the car with something sharp, presumably a giant knife that I'm lucky didn't end up in my chest. Thank God for night vision goggles that let me see him before he could see me, and thank God for big trees with sturdy branches. To answer some questions I've gotten in the comments and direct messages, I did call the police when I got back home. 2 very nice cops came into my apartment and took a report, and that was unfortunately the last I heard of it.
I've never posted to Reddit before, but I wanted to share this with you guys. Please excuse any grammatical or spelling errors I make. First, I need to give a small bit of backstory. When I was 8, part of my family moved to Jamaica from the US. We moved constantly and lived in loads of different houses in many different parishes, but eventually ended up living in Ocho Rios, St. Anne. By the time we moved to Ocho Rios, I was about 10 and my younger brother Brady was 5. Our house had bars on all the windows, as well as a barred door behind our regular door and gates. Iron fences were around our entire property. My mother and stepfather were extremely neglectful and abusive, and would leave me and my younger brother alone at times, from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. So one day my younger brother and I were playing in our front yard, trying to draw with those weird blow pens that never seemed to work. We noticed a strange group of men and one woman coming down the road toward our house. I noticed them while they were relatively far up the street. This road was on a hill, so I took a mental note. They stopped about halfway down the road and spoke to each other while still watching my little brother and I. After they finished talking, 2 of the men stayed in that spot, but moved a little bit off the road, while the other 3 men and the one woman continued toward my house, with the woman in front. I told my younger brother to go inside, and stood on my front steps watching the group come up to our front gate. One of the men began calling to us, asking if we could come to the gate so they could ask us something, but I glared at him without answering. The woman began speaking in a soothing tone about how she just really needed to talk to us for a moment, and asked if we would please come over to them. I continued to stare at them and ask what it was they needed. The woman repeated again that she just had to ask a question, and I asked what the question was. She became annoyed and looked around before ending up saying it had to do with the real estate in the area. I told her we didn't know anything about that kind of stuff, and the soothing tone quickly shifted into agitation. After some more back and forth, I could tell they were getting impatient. The woman reached her hand around to try to open the gate. The gate was not very hard to open from the outside, but it did take a moment to figure it out. As soon as she reached for the lock, I turned around and shoved my brother inside before shutting the barred door and locking its padlock. I watched as they successfully opened the gate and then told my brother, "Run!" We bolted through the house, down the stairs into the basement, out the back door, and found Forsyth. Forsyth was our landkeeper. He had worked for us since we first moved to Jamaica and was oftentimes the only person actually watching out for my brother and I. He was a super skinny Rastafarian with hardly any teeth left and always kept his dreads wrapped up in an old white t-shirt that he turned into a hat. Normally Forsyth would have left a few hours earlier, but today he stayed late to finish clearing another patch of brush. My little brother and I quickly explained all that had happened. Forsyth listened before clenching his fist around his machete and making a beeline for the front gate while Brady and I trailed close behind. The men and women were peering into our front windows while one pounded on the front door. Forsyth began cussing them out before lunging toward them and swinging the machete about. He turned to us and said to get him if they ever come back. That was really the first time I had ever witnessed someone become protective of my little brother and I. This wasn't the last time I would see the men and woman. They stayed away for about a week after Forsyth chased them off, but after a while I started noticing a few of them watching my house from up the road. Then one day, after Forsyth had left for the day, the whole group came back to our gate. This time I immediately brought my little brother in, padlocked our barred door, but had the main door open so I could still watch them. They began calling for us, and I glared at them through the bars, but as soon as one of them reached his hands in to open the gate, I closed the main door and locked that as well. We went into our playroom and grabbed some of our old German wooden blocks. My little brother and I made a plan that if they got into our house, he would hide in the lower cabinets, and I would lure the people near the cabinet so he could hit them in the knees with the block. The block was over a foot long and a couple inches thick. We also decided we would then kill them with a frying pan and drag them into the rocky ditch in the brush next to our house. Fortunately, the group left after spending over an hour pounding on our front door and calling for us to come out. Unfortunately, I have many more stories like this from my time in Jamaica, but I don't want to make this post too long. Anyway, if you'd like to hear more of them, just let me know. P.S. We told our parents about the people many times, but they really didn't care. All my mom was upset about was that we were planning to use her German building blocks, because she wouldn't want them to be damaged.
I was about 15 when my brother's girlfriend moved in with us. I was told that she was scared to be at home, so she moved in with us, though I never really knew what it was that she was afraid of. I didn't really care as a kid. I just got excited at the prospect of having a sister. I was thinking about all the things I would be able to do with her that I couldn't with my brother. Honestly, it started out really well. I felt pretty close to her. At one point, I asked her to give me some music recommendations because I'd gotten an iPod and as an excited kid, wanted to use it as soon as possible. Things were normal. At first. After a while, I did start to notice things. Some of my things would go missing. Nothing major. Hair clips, stuff like that. I would let my parents know that these things were going missing. But I was a kid, and kids lose things all the time. I didn't really think it was a big deal, because the things that were going missing weren't major. But then the accusations started. Apparently she started telling my parents that I was stealing from her, that she'd caught me red-handed. I had no idea what she was talking about, and on many occasions pointed out to her that I had no need to take any of her things that she was talking about. My parents told me not to take anything that was hers, though I think they only said that to keep the peace. This happened for a long time. At one stage, I had friends over and we were making pancakes. She stormed off angrily when she saw us because I was using her frying pan. I had no idea, and honestly, it was a frying pan. Who cares? Anyway, cut to about a year or so later. At this time, I was pretty into Tumblr. I had an account on there and would blog pretty much daily. I remember being really excited because I had gotten to a certain number of followers on there. And then, the anonymous messages started. Now, I wasn't that naive. I had received anonymous messages before and thought nothing of them. People like to bring others down. For the most part, I just laughed these messages off. I responded to them with little jokes, which was my way of letting them know that I wasn't going to let them get me down. A few days passed, and these messages continued. I didn't care much until I finally received one that terrified me. I honestly can't remember the exact wording, but it was something along the lines of, "You think you're so good sitting on that couch upstairs. That's right. I see you." I felt myself freeze up when I read it. My heart started pounding, and I instinctively looked out our window, not sure what I was expecting to see. There was no one there. Not that I could see. But whoever was sending me those messages knew exactly where I was in the house. I had gone from laughing these messages off to absolutely terrified. There was a part of me that thought maybe she was behind this, but I had no proof. I didn't tell my parents right away because I didn't want them to tell me I wasn't allowed to go on that site anymore. Stupid, I know. I kept the messages from that point on. I didn't post them. I just kept them in my inbox, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do. I remember at one point, my parents had to leave me at home alone with just my brother's girlfriend, and I told them I was scared of her and didn't want to stay with her alone. It took a lot of convincing, but they eventually let me stay at a friend's house instead. After a while of worrying, I told a friend about what had happened. They told me that they knew a way to track the IP of the messages I was getting. I had no idea what that meant. I didn't know how that stuff worked, but I agreed to let my friend do it. I let them log on to my account. They went through, and they told me that from the IP, they could tell that person who sent it was indeed in the same country as I was, but they didn't really narrow things down. So I asked my friend to check the IP of another message, one that I sent. The IP was identical to the one that had sent me those messages. So they were someone in my house. My brother wasn't really big on social websites. There was no way in hell my parents would send me something like that. I felt like this was all the proof I needed. Finally, I went to my parents about this. I told them about the messages I'd gotten. I told them about the IPs. My parents called my brother and his girlfriend upstairs to talk to them about it. She smiled, telling my parents she had no idea what I was talking about. Until my parents told her about the IPs. Suddenly, she lost it. She was screaming about how I was the favorite, how much she hated me. I had never been so scared before. Most of what I remember about that night was screaming. I ended up going outside with my phone and sitting on the front lawn, crying. I just needed to get away for a while. There's not much more to say. My dad told me that she told him that she hated I was the favorite daughter. I was his only daughter. After that day, I stayed as far away from her as possible. When she was around, I didn't speak. I didn't want to give her any fuel. My parents told me she wasn't taking her medication, and that probably had something to do with it. My parents told me she wasn't taking her medication, and that probably had something to do with it. I don't know if she's on her medication now. She and my brother moved out a while ago. My parents tell me she's like a different person now. She seems much happier, but I don't visit them. Whenever I see her, I remember that fear. But after all that crazy stuff that she did, I just can't bring myself to face